Canada is built on the ancestral land of Indigenous peoples, but regrettably, it's also a country that came into being without the meaningful participation of those who were there first. And even where treaties had been formed to provide a foundation for proper relations, they have not been fully honored or implemented. For First Nations, Métis Nation and Inuit peoples in Canada, those early colonial relationships were not about strength through diversity or a celebration of differences. For Indigenous peoples in Canada, the experience was mostly one of humiliation, neglect, and abuse. There are today children living on reserve in Canada who cannot safely drink, bathe in, or even play in the water that comes out of their taps. There are Indigenous parents in Canada who say goodnight to their children and have to cross their fingers in the hopes that their kids won't run away or take their own lives in the night. Young Indigenous people in Canada struggle to get a good education, and though residential schools are thankfully a thing of the past, too many Indigenous youth are still sent far away, far from their families, just to get the basic education most Canadians take for granted. And far, far too many Indigenous women live in Canada a life that includes threats of violence so frequent and severe that Amnesty International has called it a human rights crisis. That is the legacy of colonialism in Canada, of a paternalistic Indian Act, of the forced relocation of Inuit and First Nations communities, and a systematic denial of Métis rights and history, of residential schools that separated children as young as 5 years old from their families, punished them for speaking their own language, and sought to extinguish Indigenous cultures entirely. The good news is that Canadians get it. They see the inequities, and they're fed up with the excuses. And that impatience gives us a rare and precious opportunity to act. We now have before us an opportunity to deliver true, meaningful, and lasting reconciliation between Canada and First Nations, the Métis Nation, and Inuit peoples.